Hello, and a really warm welcome to this new video from The Deep Dive.
Hi, everyone.
We're quite excited today because, well, this is a special deep dive. It's designed specifically for you, our friends, learning English.
That's right. We want this to be clear, obviously, but also, a good way to build vocabulary and practice listening.
Absolutely. So our topic today is global warming. Basically, it just means the Earth is getting hotter over a long period. It's a big subject, but we'll break it down.
And we've pulled together information explaining, what it is, the causes, the effects.
That's the U.S. role, what's being done.
And importantly, how you can actually help.
Yeah. So our goal here is to help you understand the key facts in hopefully clear and simple English. We'll point out some useful words too and see how it all connects.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's dive in. What exactly is global warming?
Well, at its heart, global warming is this long-term increase in the Earth's average surface temperature.
Long-term meaning,
Right.
over decades, not just one hot summer.
Exactly. We're talking about changes over many, many years.
And we know this is actually happening. There's proof.
Oh, definitely. Scientists track temperatures very carefully. And the data, well, it clearly shows this warming trend, especially since the late 1800s.
How much warmer has it gotten?
It's gone up by about 1.1 degrees Celsius since then.
1.1 degrees doesn't sound like a huge number, maybe?
It might not sound like much, but even that small change has really big consequences for the planet.
And what's driving it? What's the main reason for this temperature rise?
The science is very clear on this. It's overwhelmingly driven by human activities.
Things we do every day.
Pretty much. Like how we use energy, how we travel, how we make things. These release certain gases that trap heat.
So it's not just about, hotter days here and there.
Not at all. It leads to much bigger shifts, changes in weather patterns, rising sea levels, major problems for plants and animals. It affects the whole system.
Right. And I think NASA had some recent findings that really bring this home.
Yes, exactly. NASA monitors this closely. Their data shows the last decade was actually the warmest ever recorded.
A whole decade.
The whole decade. And 2023 was right up there, one of the hottest years ever measured. So this isn't some future thing, it's happening right now.
Okay, that definitely makes it feel urgent. So what are the main dangers then? The threats?
Well, they're significant, and they're all kind of linked. We're talking threats to biodiversity. That's all the different kinds of life on Earth.
Okay.
It affects human livelihoods, how people live, work, grow food. And it can destabilize the natural systems we all rely on, like forests and oceans.
Got it. Okay, so that's what it is. Now let's get into the causes. What actually makes it happen?
Right. So the main cause is the increase of what we call greenhouse gases in our atmosphere.
Greenhouse gases.
Yeah. Think of the atmosphere like a blanket around the Earth. It keeps us warm enough. Greenhouse gases are like specific threads in that blanket that trap heat from the sun. It's natural, but we're adding too many extra threads, making the blanket too thick.
So the Earth gets too hot. What are the main gases we should know about?
The big ones are carbon dioxide, that's CO2. Then there's methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O, and also some things called fluorinated gases.
Okay.
They all trap heat, but in slightly different ways and for different amounts of time.
You mentioned the greenhouse effect. Is there another way to picture that?
Yeah, maybe think about a car parked in the sun.
Okay.
On a hot day, windows up, sunlight gets in, warms up the inside, right? But the heat can't easily get back out, so the car gets super hot inside.
Right.
Greenhouse gases act a bit like those car windows. They let the sun's energy in, but they stop some of the heat from escaping back out to space.
That helps. That makes sense. So where do all these extra gases come from? What are the main human activities?
Okay, the biggest one, by far, is burning fossil fuels. We're talking coal, oil, and natural gas.
For what mainly?
For electricity generation, for powering our cars, trucks, planes, and also for running a lot of industry and factories. That accounts for something like 75% of global CO2 emissions.
75%.
Yeah.
Just from fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's huge.
So flicking on a light switch, driving my car, that contributes.
Exactly. Another big one is deforestation, cutting down forests.
How does that work?
Well, trees are amazing. They absorb CO2 from the air like natural sponges.
Right.
When we cut them down, they stop absorbing it, obviously. But also, the carbon that was stored in the trees often gets released back into the atmosphere. That's maybe 10-15% of global emissions.
Wow. Okay. And I've also heard farming, specifically animals, plays a part.
Yes. Agriculture is definitely part of it, especially raising livestock like cattle.
Cows.
Yeah, cows, they release methane as part of their digestion. And methane, CH4, is a really potent greenhouse gas.
More potent than CO2.
Much more, yes. Over about 100 years, it traps something like 25 times more heat than the same amount of CO2.
25 times. Okay, that's significant. Any other major sources?
Yeah, certain industrial processes like making cement or chemicals release gases. And waste management like landfills, they release methane too. Plus those fluorinated gases often used in things like refrigeration and air conditioning.
So it really seems like it comes from lots of different areas: energy, forests, food, industry.
That's a good summary. It's widespread. And the result is that the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has shot up incredibly fast since the Industrial Revolution, nearly 50% higher now.
50%. That's a massive change in a relatively short time, geologically speaking.
Exactly.
Okay, so the planet's warming up because of these extra gases. But how does that connect to the really extreme weather we seem to be seeing more of, like stronger storms, floods, heat waves?
Ah, right. That's a key connection. Basically, warmer air can hold more moisture, more water vapor.
Okay.
There's a principle, the Clausius-Clapeyron relation, that says for roughly every degree Celsius the air warms up, it can hold about 7% more water vapor.
So warmer air is like a bigger sponge for water.
That's a great way to put it, yes. And when all that extra moisture eventually falls as rain...
You get much heavier downpours, bigger floods.
Exactly. Which increases the risk of flooding dramatically. Think about Hurricane Ida back in 2021. Those devastating floods in New York City, caused by record rainfall amounts.
Yeah, that was intense. What about the opposite extreme heat?
Well, a rising average global temperature naturally means that periods of extreme heat waves, become more frequent, last longer, and get, well, hotter.
Any examples?
The European heat wave in 2022 is a stark one. It led to, sadly, over 15,000 deaths. And studies directly linked its severity and likelihood to climate change.
That's terrible. But then some places are getting drier, right? How does warming cause droughts?
It works in a few ways. Higher temperatures mean more water evaporates from the soil and from plants, drying things out faster. Plus, the warming changes large-scale weather patterns, which can mean less rainfalls in certain regions over long periods. We've seen this causing severe problems in places like California or the Horn of Africa, leading to water shortages, crop failures.
And wildfires, too. They seem worse.
Definitely connected. Yeah. Those drier conditions create more fuel for fires. I mean, remember the Australian bushfires in 2020?
Oh, yeah, they were awful.
Just devastating. Burned something like 47 million acres. And that was fueled by record heat and prolonged drought.
So basically, these extreme events, the heavy rain, the intense heat, the bad droughts, the huge fires, they're not just random bad luck anymore. They're becoming more common because of global warming.
That's the key takeaway. Extreme weather always happened, of course, but global warming is like turning up the volume, making these events happen more often and with greater intensity.
Okay. Beyond the weather, what other major effects is global warming having?
Oh, the impacts are really broad. A huge one is rising sea levels.
Right. Why is that happening?
Two main reasons. First, ice sheets and glaciers, especially in Greenland and Antarctica, are melting and the water runs into the ocean.
Okay.
Second, as ocean water gets warmer, it actually expands, takes up more space. It's called thermal expansion.
So melting ice and expanding water, how fast are sea levels rising?
Globally, the average is about 3.7 millimeters per year, according to NOAA.
3.7 millimeters. Again, sounds small year to year.
But it adds up year after year, decade after decade. And it poses a massive threat to low-lying coastal communities and cities. Think Miami, Venice, entire island nations like the Maldives. They're really vulnerable.
That's a scary thought. What about life in the oceans?
Also facing huge problems. Coral reefs are particularly sensitive.
How so?
Warmer water causes something called coral bleaching. The corals get stressed and kick out the tiny algae that live inside them and provide their food and color.
So they turn white.
Exactly. They turn white. And if the water stays too warm for too long, the corals can die. We've already lost about 50% of the Great Barrier Reef since the 1990s.
Half. That's incredible. And aren't reefs really important?
Hugely important. They're like the rainforests of the sea, home to maybe 25% of all marine life. So when they suffer, the whole ocean ecosystem suffers.
Wow. Okay. What about on land? How's it affecting our ability to grow food, agriculture?
Agriculture faces some serious challenges. Higher temperatures stress major crops, like wheat and maize, often reducing how much they produce, the yields.
Yeah.
Changes in rainfall too much or too little can wipe out harvests. And warmer climates allow pests and crop diseases to spread into new areas where they weren't before.
So our food supply could be threatened.
It definitely puts pressure on global food security, yes. That's a real concern.
And these changes, they could force people to move.
Absolutely. Environmental changes are already displacing people. The World Bank has estimated that by 2050, maybe 143 million people could be forced to move internally within their countries due to things like desertification, good land turning to desert, rising sea levels, and water scarcity.
143 million people, that's staggering. Are there direct health impacts too?
Yes. More intense heat waves mean more heat stress, heat stroke, especially for vulnerable people.
Right.
And changing climate patterns can also expand the geographic range of diseases carried by insects, like mosquitoes carrying malaria or dengue fever.
It really sounds like it's not just one single problem. It's like a web of interconnected issues.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a complex system, and all of these effects are linked. Warming causes sea level rise, which impacts coastal communities. It impacts weather, which affects farming, which affects food security, which can lead to displacement. It's all connected.
Okay, it's clearly a global issue. But let's zoom in on the United States for a bit. Where does the U.S. stand in terms of, well, contributing to the problem?
The U.S. plays a really significant role, historically and currently. Right now, the U.S. is responsible for about 13 to 15% of the world's annual carbon dioxide emissions.
13 to 15%. How does that compare globally?
It's the second largest share after China. But what's striking is the U.S. only has about 4% of the global population.
So 4% of people producing 13, 15% of the emissions.
Exactly. It points to a high level of emissions per person. Do we have a figure for the total U.S. emissions?
Yes, according to the EPA, in 2022, U.S. greenhouse gas emissions were around 6.3 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent.
6.3 billion tons. That's a huge number. Where does that mostly come from within the U.S.?
The biggest chunk is transportation cars, trucks, planes. That's about 29%.
Okay.
Then electricity generation is next, about 25%. And industries around 20%. Those are the big three.
Transportation, electricity, industry. Got it. And you mentioned historically.
Yes, that's also really important. If you look back since, say, the mid-1800s, the U.S. has actually emitted more CO2 into the atmosphere than any other single country.
More than anyone else over time.
More than anyone. Over 400 billion tons since 1850. That's nearly double China's historical total, for context.
Wow. Okay, and that links back to the high emissions per person you mentioned.
Right. Per capita emissions in the U.S. are among the highest in the world, around 15 tons per person per year. It reflects, a lifestyle that uses a lot of energy.
So given both the current high emissions and that huge historical contribution,
It means the U.S. has a particularly significant responsibility, wouldn't you say, both to reduce its own emissions and maybe help find solutions globally.
absolutely. That level of contribution really underscores the importance of U.S. action.
So is the U.S. doing anything? Taking steps to tackle global warming, it sounds like a monumental task.
It is a huge task, yes. And the U.S. is taking steps. It's complicated, though, and there's always debate about whether it's enough or fast enough.
What are some of the main actions or commitments?
Well, a big symbolic and practical step was rejoining the Paris Agreement in 2021.
Right. What does that involve?
As part of that, the U.S. set a target: cut emissions 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by the year 2030.
Okay, that's a concrete goal.
And the longer-term goal is to reach net zero emissions by 2050.
Net zero means balancing out any remaining emissions.
Exactly. Either by not emitting them or by removing them from the atmosphere.
Are there specific policies to help achieve this? Laws.
Yes, probably the most significant recent one is the Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022.
What does that do?
It directs a lot of money, about $369 billion, towards clean energy and climate initiatives. Things like tax credits for solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, trying to boost those industries.
And is that making a difference? Are we seeing more clean energy?
We are seeing growth. Renewable sources like wind and solar now generate about 14% of U.S. electricity. That's up significantly.
Okay, 14%. Are individual states doing things too?
Oh, definitely. State action is really important. California is often a leader. They've mandated that all new cars sold must be zero emission by 2035.
Wow, by 2035.
Yeah, and they have a statewide goal for carbon neutrality by 2045. Other states have ambitious targets too.
I also hear the U.S. is still a massive producer of oil and gas.
That's the complexity, yes. Despite the push for renewables, fossil fuels still provide the majority, around 60% of U.S. energy.
60%. Still the majority.
And the U.S. is actually one of the world's top oil producers right now, pumping out nearly 13 million barrels a day in 2023.
So there's this tension, promoting clean energy while still heavily relying on and producing fossil fuels.
Exactly. It highlights the challenges of transitioning a huge economy. There are political disagreements, economic factors, existing infrastructure. It's not a simple switch.
So progress, yes, but also ongoing challenges and, well, maybe some contradictions.
That's a very fair way to describe the situation. There's movement, but the path forward is still being debated and navigated.
Okay, hearing all this, the scale of the problem, the complexities, it can honestly feel overwhelming. It makes you think, is this just too big? What can one person, possibly do?
That's such a common feeling, and it's completely understandable. It is a massive global challenge, but, and this is really important, individual actions are not meaningless. They absolutely matter.
Really? You think so?
Definitely. They are a crucial piece of the puzzle. Don't underestimate the power of individual choices when they're multiplied across many people.
Okay, that's good to hear. So what are some practical everyday actions people can take?
There are lots. Some are really simple, like switching your light bulbs to LEDs. They use up to 75% less energy than the old incandescent ones.
75% less.
Or just unplugging electronics when you're not using them. Lots of things use phantom power, even when off.
Right, the little standby lights. What about bigger impact things?
Well, what we eat makes a difference. Generally, eating less meat, especially red meat like beef, has a lower carbon footprint. Some studies suggest that shift can significantly cut your personal emissions.
Interesting. And travel, since transportation is a big source in the U.S.
Absolutely. If you have the option, choosing public transit, biking, walking, or even carpooling instead of driving alone makes a real difference.
So these daily choices, they do add up.
They really do. And think about your purchasing power, too. Supporting businesses and brands that are trying to be sustainable, that sends a market signal.
Okay. Using your wallet.
Exactly. And using your voice. Being informed, talking about it, maybe voting for leaders and policies that prioritize climate action that scales up the impact beyond just your personal footprint.
What about local community stuff? Does that help?
Yes. Getting involved locally can be great. Things like community tree planting, local cleanup efforts, they have a direct impact. Plus, they build community and raise awareness.
So it's not just about individual isolated actions.
Not at all. Advocacy is powerful too. Sharing information, signing petitions, contacting local officials to let them know this matters to you. These things push for the bigger systemic changes we also need.
Okay, so the message really is, yes, it's huge, but don't feel powerless. Every action contributes something.
Precisely. No single action solves it alone, obviously. But millions of people making conscious choices, that shifts markets, influences policy, creates a different culture. You are absolutely part of the solution.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful, a really helpful deep dive. Just to quickly wrap up the main takeaways for everyone listening.
Yeah, let's summarize.
Okay, so global warming is this long-term heating of the Earth.
Caused mainly by human activities releasing greenhouse gases like CO2.
Right. And this is leading to serious consequences, more extreme weather, rising seas.
Damage to ecosystems like coral reefs and threats to food, health, and where people can live.
The U.S. is a major contributor, historically and currently.
But there are efforts underway, like the Paris Agreement goals and investments in clean energy, although challenges remain.
And crucially, even though the problem is huge, individual actions matter. They add up.
Absolutely. From changing light bulbs to making different food or travel choices to getting involved and speaking up, every bit helps.
And just learning about this, talking about it in English, understanding the terms, that's valuable too, right? Especially for learners.
Totally. Understanding is the first step towards action.
So here's a final thought for you to maybe ponder. What's one small change you could realistically make in your own daily life, starting soon, that could help address global warming?
Yeah, just one thing to start with.
Think about it. Maybe discuss it with friends or fellow learners. Let's all try to be part of that positive change.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us for this important deep dive today.